In this video, I want to talk about intelligence. Who's got it and who don't got it. Who doesn't got it. Who don't have. If psychology is going to do anything, it's going to be to supply a definition of intelligence. And like a lot of things that psychology has done, it's still trying to work out the kinks. And so as I define intelligence, intelligence quotient, define or describe the intelligence tests, I'm going to point out some of the problems that have followed intelligence since its early start. The very first problem of educational psychology dealt with how to best put students together into cohorts. Typically, we put students together with other students of the same age, so 10-year-olds will be educated with 10-year-olds, 13-year-olds with 13-year-olds, and so on. By the beginning of the 20th century, and still today, we've learned that this isn't the best way to group students. It's not necessarily most advantageous to all of them. Some students needed extra help, and some needed less help and could really advance on to more demanding subject areas with perhaps older students. Alfred Binet at Stanford was selected to design a test that would reliably differentiate one group of students from another group of students based on certain tasks they could perform or could not perform. And so, for instance, instead of just dividing students into ages of 10, 11, and 12, he was interested in what kind of tasks 10-year-olds could do, the kinds of tasks that 11-year-olds could do, and so on. And so in those questions that had graded levels of difficulty that began with the very simplest questions for the youngsters and grew in difficulty throughout adolescence and so on, he would ask people to repeat words of growing sophistication, difficult syllables to pronounce, difficult number of syllables to remember and repeat, various spatial and physical reasoning tasks, and so on. Each question, or each test, included about 30 items, and it was understood that these items would represent not the student's age, but their chronological age, but their intellectual age. Intellectual age can be defined as the kinds of problems that people of a particular age can solve. So we can imagine a normal bell curve of 10-year-olds, for instance, and right in the middle of that bell curve are the kinds of questions and the kinds of problems that most 10-year-olds can solve. And so, because of that normal distribution, that would be understood as the intellectual age of a 10-year-old. Now, some 10-year-olds can do more than that, and they can actually solve problems that most 10-year-olds can't. And other 10-year-olds may struggle to answer the same problems that most 10-year-olds can. So 10-year-olds can be distributed across these varying abilities. So if someone lands right in the middle, their intellectual age is 10, which is the same as their chronological age. That gives them an IQ, which is mental age divided by chronological age, of 1. And which you multiply by 100, that would be an IQ of 100. And we understand that that's perfectly normal. Now, if there's a 10-year-old that can answer the same kinds of questions as 12-year-olds, most 12-year-olds, that would give him an intellectual age, or her an intellectual age, of 12 divided by 10, the IQ would be 120. There you have it. That's how you calculate IQs. So it seems like the intelligence test that Alfred Binet has designed is quite remarkable. It can reliably differentiate students based on the kind of problems that they can answer or solve. And so you put students not who are 12 years of age, but who have an intellectual age of 12, together with other students with the intellectual age of 12, and that's better. That's a better way of dividing them up than simply relying on chronological age. But there are a couple of problems with this, and it wasn't really recognized right away and revised for many decades. And then there were even deeper problems that weren't revised until almost a century later, and there's still some remaining problems. I want to talk about a few of those. And so I want to tell a couple of stories from my own life that really capture, I think, some of these biases in these intelligence tests, or the kinds of questions that are asked. Now, I've varied a lot with the kinds of examples that I give, and so this time I want to give some very particular ones, very specific ones, to the kinds of items that Binet had designed. And so I want to talk first about pronunciation or enunciation of words, being able to hear a difficult word and repeat it. So we can imagine things like pot, cat, hat, chair. Like these would be something that we'd expect young children to be able to pronounce. Pronounce could be one that they could have 30-year-olds try to repeat. All right, and so what I want to demonstrate here is that the pronunciation of a word, even something as simple as trying to repeat the diction, like what needs to be pronounced in a particular word, can put some at a disadvantage and others at an advantage. Now, how might the pronunciation of a word put some people at an advantage and others at a disadvantage? Well, think about this. There's a lake in the middle of Georgia near Macon. I still can't pronounce it to this day. Whenever I drive past it with my fiance, who lived in Macon for 4 years, I always try to pronounce it and she always corrects me, and I try to remember for the next time and I still can't pronounce it. And I'm clearly beyond the point of being able to pronounce some words, except for pronounce, when I think it might be pronounced pronunciate or something like that. That would land me into a different age category, I'm sure. I'm going to give it a shot, and I'll put the word here on the bottom. You can pronounce it yourself. It's Tobasovki, Tobaskofi, Tobosfki, Tobskofi, and I don't know if any of these are right, so hopefully one of them was correct. Now, can you understand how somebody who grew up around Lake Tobos, whatever, Tobaskofi, they're going to be able to pronounce that, and somebody who hasn't, like me, will not be able to pronounce that? Now, is that a fair item to differentiate people in terms of intelligence? Do you see how it can advantage some people and disadvantage others? All right, another example that comes from me, because as a white male, I'm the only person who's ever experienced biases against me when it comes to ratings and measures of intelligence. When I first moved down to Kentucky, this was when I was in middle school, it was the beginning of a school year, I think it was 8th grade, and I was in a social studies classroom. Now, the instructor knew that I was a new student and wanted to sort of introduce me into the class and make me feel comfortable, and so he threw me a couple of underhand pitches. He threw me a couple of lobs. He was trying to set me up to really have a good first day in class, so that I would feel like I fit in. And so he gave me the easiest question that he was going to ask all class period, and that was, what is the capital of Kentucky? Another way of putting this for everyone else in the class would be, what is the capital of the state that we're all in right now attending school? I had no idea. I even had to look it up before I made this video. It's Frankfurt. I guessed Louisville or Lexington, and everyone started laughing because they learned this in like 2nd grade. They knew what the capital, they probably visited the capital, and I was from Michigan. It's like, how many of you guys know the capital of Michigan? It's not Detroit, by the way, it's Lansing. I knew that, of course. I had visited Lansing, I had visited the state capital, but I didn't know the capital of Kentucky. And so I knew right then that it wasn't really a fair question to be called an easy one, even though 99% of the class all knew the answer. So really, that would put me into a category below the intelligence of my peers. And so I might have gotten relegated to 7th grade back then, and who knows where I'd be now. Probably not teaching about intelligence. So the point here is that the intelligence items do a good job based on each region. If they're region specific, that would make more sense, but really they're not. And so try to think of the ways that certain questions may bias some people as opposed to others. Oftentimes, especially in the classics in history, we like to refer to ancient religious texts as part of history. They're historical documents. Now, how many of you would be able to answer a question about the Pentateuch? How about the Quran? How many of you are familiar with that? How about the Bhagavad Gita? It's the 2nd best-selling book in the world behind the Bible. Questions can be historically significant, yet privilege some people and put others at a disadvantage. And so this is the big problem with intelligence tests. How do we measure intelligence if it isn't through these biased questions? Can you think of any question that wouldn't privilege others and put some at a disadvantage? Howard Gardner was an educational psychologist at Harvard who asked similar questions about intelligence. Specifically, how do we measure it? What are we really interested in? So what do these items, or what are these items directed at? In the examples that I gave, verbal, spatial, quantitative, and physical sort of reasoning skills and problem solving really are directed at certain types of intelligence. And this is what we typically agree on, these being intelligence, and everything else is just extra. Everything else is nice, but isn't specifically intelligence. Well, Howard Gardner wanted a better definition of intelligence. He defined intelligence as anything that somebody can get better at. The number of intelligences isn't important, but what he realized was that, especially in school, and what they were calling intelligence really was two different things. It was verbal intelligence and quantitative or mathematical intelligence. Now think about that. The kinds of majors that come in being able to read and write a lot and being able to compute difficult mathematical problems, those are what we tend to call intelligent people. We almost say that, oh, you're a physics major, a calculus major, you must be smart. But think about what we're doing when we do that. We're saying that certain things count as intelligence when other things don't. We privilege some kinds of intelligence and we disparage or denigrate or put down other kinds of intelligence. What Gardner wanted was an education that focused on your intelligence. This is what Howard Gardner thought education should be. Everyone's intelligence is the most important intelligence for them. If you're good at music, that's what you need to emphasize. You need to get better at music. If you're an athlete, like, you need to devote your time to that. You need to get better at that. And you need to be measured on these different scales. Like, everyone should have their own scale in terms of improvement. So does this make education easy? No. Anybody who's mastered an instrument or who's gotten better at an artistic skill, they'll tell you how many hours and hours and hours they devote to it, cultivating that skill. In fact, it's much harder than memorizing a handful of proofs, if all they're after is memorization. Now, if somebody's good at the memorization of proofs or the solution of proofs, then they're going to spend more and more time doing that, cultivating that skill. Do you see where I'm going with this? Education could be built around people's skill sets. You can take a test and see which intelligences you score highly on. And the question that I would pose for you after you do this is, what would it look like if your education was built around this? And so, for instance, if you scored high in music and intrapersonal skills, what might your education look like? Now, a lot of students, when they hear this, they say, okay, how can I use that to learn math? No, that's not the point. Forget about math. If it comes up and it's a problem, then find the resources you need to solve those problems. But in terms of education and cultivating you as a person, what might a school or what might a college degree that's built around your intelligences look like? How would it cultivate your gifts and talents?